Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial on how to do paint chipping on vehicles. Okay, so here we have the side of a Rhino. It's been painted with Citadel Macragge Blue. Now I haven't bothered doing any highlights on it, it's just flat Macragge Blue. And now we're going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black. Any black can be used for this. We're also going to be using a small piece of the blister pack sponge that you get when you're buying some of those smaller blister packs of miniatures. All we're going to do is fold that up so it's a nice little sponge. I'm going to dab that into the Vallejo Black, and then you're going to use a piece of paper or something like that just to get the excess black off, so that you've just got enough to put paint onto the hull of the tank. If you have too much paint on, it'll just sort of blob that on quite thick and you won't get as many small spots, and the small spots are what gives it the effect of the paint chipping, so you do want to have that so there's a lot of tiny little spots on there, as well as some of the bigger areas where a lot of paint has been chipped away. So I'm just going to speed through this bit as we add a little bit more chipping to different areas. Now I'm going to use a really thin brush. I'm using the Army Painter Wargamer character brush. I'm just going to show you here, if you try and paint a straight line by painting sideways, you're going to get that slight curve to it as your hand pivots, but if you do it straight down, you'll get a far straighter line to represent a scrape or a scratch or something like that going along it. I was going to put a few little nicks and long scratches brushed on like this. When you're doing paint chipping or battle damage or anything like this, it is good to have a few little straight lines in there as well as the overall chipped areas, because that just makes it look less uniform, if that's the right way. Like so. So now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Kalgar Blue. All you're going to do now is quite long and painstaking and can be quite tedious if you're doing it over a whole tank, so you don't want to go too wild with the chipping. You're going to go on the underside of each of the chips and each of the scrapes and just paint a thin line of Kalgar Blue underneath this. Now obviously if you're using like a red, like say Mephisto on red for the tank or something, you're probably looking at maybe Squig Orange or something like that, something a bit lighter that is going to stand out like that. So the Calgar Blue does work with Macragge Blue, like so. I'm just going to carry that on so that you can see there that we've got one scrape done. You want to do a tiny little bit at the end of the scrape as well, because what these white lines, or the lighter coloured lines rather, are representing is light hitting the edge of the chipped paint, and it just gives it that little 3D effect. It makes it look like there is a layer there as opposed to it being pretty much a flat surface. So you can see that you're just going to be adding it to the underside of each of the black spots. You don't want to go above it, because if you paint it above, it doesn't look like the light's catching it anymore, and it stops it having that kind of 3D effect. It just looks like the whole thing has got too many like edge highlights to it. You just want to have it on the underside of the notches and things, and that does give it that look of light hitting the edge of the chip paint. What you may find when you're putting this on is you put it on, and then once you've done the rest of the layers, it looks a little bit too thin, maybe doesn't show up quite as much. But if it does that, just go over it with the Calgar Blue again. Towards the end of the video you might notice some little areas aren't showing up quite as well, and all I'll do from that is add a little bit more Calgar Blue and do a slightly thicker line on each of those. So you can see here the 3D effect is starting to come together on that bottom part that I was just working on there. I'm going to speed through here, speed up the footage just to get a little bit more done. Now bearing in mind this is just on flat Calgar Blue, there's no highlights or anything like that to it, so once you've highlighted the tank, you've got all that kind of thing done, and you then start working on the chipping, it will add that extra dimension of 3D to it. skip to the next part now because it does take quite some time to paint all these little bits on. But this is how it's looking now with the highlights underneath each of the scrapes. And now we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Leadbelcher to add some metallic to the areas that we've painted black. Now when you're painting this on, you do want to leave a little edge of black all the way around it. You don't want to do Leadbelcher all the way up to the blue. You're only going to put this on the bigger scratches, scrapes and chips, because if you try and put it onto all the smaller ones as well, it will just make it look like a little line of dots. You'd have the Kalgar Blue, the black, then the Leadbelcher, then the black on a spot, and that wouldn't look too good. So you're going to carefully add the Leadbelcher to all of the bigger areas. You can see now that that is starting to look a little bit more 3D on that bigger splodge of black in the middle there. I'll move on to one of the smaller pieces now, and then I'll go back to that bigger bit to finish it off shortly. What you want to do is carry on putting the Leadbelcher to all the bigger areas of chipping. And once that's done, we can move on to the next part. Just going to speed through this a little bit. We're not going to speed through the entire thing because, again, like the highlighting that we've just done to the edges of all the chips, it does take quite some time to put this Leadbelcher back on, so we're going to skip some of that and then come on to the next part. Now that we've got that done, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Nuln Oil. We're just going to tone down those chips. Now whereas we did the scrapes the other week and you'd put the shade on and then you'd do a few little scrapes through with the Leadbelcher again, on these, because these are just paint chips and it's where something's maybe bashed against it or hit against it and chipped that paintwork, we're just going to tone this down and we're not going to add any Leadbelcher back to it. Unless of course you've got scrapes going across it, in which case you can add a little bit of that Leadbelcher back. But in terms of just all the other sections, we're just going to add some Nuln Oil to it and dull that down a little bit. Like so. The final thing that we're going to do is use a little bit of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. We are just going to use this to grime up the bottom of some of these chips so they look a little bit more old and weathered. This is going to be on the bigger areas, you don't really need to do it on the little ones because you wouldn't be able to see it properly anyway. We're just going to add a little bit of Agrax Earthshade to the bottom of these areas as though there's been a bit of grime build up on the top where the paint is missing. Depending on how dark you want the Agrax Earthshade, you can always wait till it dries and then do another layer of it over the top of the first one. Sometimes that's not too necessary, just depends on how dark you want that brown griminess. With that done, we have the chipping finished. So pretty happy with how that turned out, but it is a very quick and easy method to do paint chipping. Thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and you enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, you can find links to our Ko-fi and Patreon pages linked below. Thanks very much.